Welcome back to our channel where we share updates and untold stories about Catherine, Princess of Wales and her royal family. Today we bring you some significant news. Prince William cuts all ties with Queen Camilla's family after Andrew Parker Bowles' bombshell revelation. In an unprecedented action that has profoundly impacted the British monarchy, Prince William, the Prince of Wales, has executed a total and immediate termination of all royal connections, rights, and access for the family of his stepmother, Queen Camilla. The decision, characterized by palace insiders as both ruthless and agonizingly necessary, was executed with a rapidity that has left the royal household in shock and the public astonished. The impetus for this monarchical upheaval is a dramatic and profoundly personal revelation from Brigadier Andrew Parker Bowles, the 84-year-old ex-husband of Queen Camilla. Sources affiliated with the Prince of Wales assert that Parker Bowles, after years of reticent silence, has delivered a scathing testimony that purportedly outlines a prolonged history of deliberate ambition manipulation and a behavioral pattern that William now perceives as an existential threat to the future of the crown. The proclamation, promulgated under the authority of the Prince of Wales with the implicit if hesitant approval of a weak king, Charles III, removes Camilla's children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, together with their descendants from any legal and informal affiliations with the monarchy. This entails the annulment of invitations to state functions, the termination of any financial or security privileges associated with their mother's status, and the removal of their names from official court announcements and guest lists. The news spread around the castle with explosive intensity. Rumors circulated around the halls of Clarence House and Buckingham Palace far in advance of any formal announcement to the media. Personnel used to the quiet entitlement of Camilla's offspring and grandchildren were confronted with abrupt expulsion orders. Their presence, formerly a common occurrence at family gatherings and semi-official functions, was now considered undesirable. Initial astonishment transformed into profound incredulity. Certain courtiers loyal to the Queen have characterized William's conduct as ruthless. Longtime watchers of the internal dynamics discreetly said that they had anticipated this turmoil for years. However, no one could contest the stark clarity of the action. Prince William has established a clear boundary, one that his father, the king, has previously been reluctant to delineate. This was not only a political choice. It was a declaration embedded in the essence of the monarchy. The Prince of Wales would no longer endure encroachments against the future he sees for his children and the institution he is destined to govern. To the world, he was the obedient successor, meticulously avoiding overreach and exercising caution to avert public discord. In a one resounding action, that facade of control disintegrated. The choice was neither incremental nor subtle. It was executed with meticulous precision, designed to eliminate any uncertainty over who had authority over the monarchy's destiny. Camilla's family was universally taken by surprise. Laura Lopes, the daughter of Camilla, who has always valued her discreet and secluded existence away from public attention, was said to be upset. Tom Parker Bowles, the renowned culinary writer, often scrutinized for exploiting his royal connection, abruptly experienced a severance from the source of prestige that underpinned his career and reputation. The grandkids, yet too immature to comprehend the gravity of the situation, will now mature with the knowledge that they have been permanently excluded from the palace. The journalists approached with insatiable eagerness, detecting vulnerability. Headlines announced William's resolute resistance, marking his abrupt metamorphosis into a man no longer willing to be eclipsed by compromise. Analysts deliberated on whether the king was excessively unwell or overly prudent to take action. Some conjectured that Charles had covertly endorsed William's choice as a necessary malevolence. Others believed that he was just unable of halting his resolute successor. The profound quiet from the throne exacerbated the pandemonium, inciting speculation that William was not acting independently, but rather with the spectral approbation of a woman whose legacy continues to haunt the monarchy, his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales. Supporters of the late princess see this deed as poetic justice, a conclusive triumph in a conflict they perceived as always unresolved. For Camilla's proponents, it is an act of extraordinary brutality disguised as change. The atmosphere throughout the palace is palpably ominous. William has acted promptly, although the gravity of his choice reverberates with implications of a broader, more perilous kind. If the rumors are accurate, then William's action was not only about severing connections. The objective was to unveil a secret that had languished for decades, awaiting the opportune time to surface. The admission that violated a pledge of silence. To comprehend the Prince of Wales's significant decision, one must revisit the person who formerly had the closest familiarity with Camilla, her ex-spouse, Andrew Parker Bowles. For years, the former Army officer kept a dignified and impenetrable silence, concealing information that might have undermined the monarchy's meticulously crafted narrative. Unexpectedly, he has finally violated his commitment, and his statements have reverberated directly inside Buckingham Palace. Andrew was not only a spouse to Camilla, he served as a witness and accomplice, and ultimately a victim of her ambition. Their marriage, first characterized by young passion, gradually disintegrated into a convoluted web of treachery, clandestine liaisons, and an omnipresent feeling that something much more significant was always concealed behind her gaze. He observed as she navigated the confines of aristocratic decorum, establishing connections that would ultimately tether her to an unforeseen fate for both. Despite Andrew's decision to remain silent after their 1995 divorce, he harbored realities that lingered in the obscurity around the crown. Decades later, that quiet has been shattered. In a series of discreet, rigorously safeguarded discussions with close associates, discussions that were carefully communicated to the Prince of Wales, Andrew presented what many now refer to as his explosive confession. Words he had previously suppressed due to a misguided sense of loyalty or even fear emerged in private circles with catastrophic impact. He admitted to being aware of Camilla's unyielding quest for power despite her commitments to him. He acknowledged that due to his own frailty and perhaps influenced by the indulgent aristocratic society of the era, he overlooked her strategic maneuvers, aware that she was entrenching herself more into the royal entanglement. The lucidity of his speech left people astonished. He was neither bitter nor furious, but burdened by the weight of deep sorrow. He had facilitated her. He had remained passive, seeing her forge a route to power, so contributing to the tempest currently engulfing the kingdom. What Andrew subsequently disclosed was far more sinister. He recounted private discussions in which Camilla rejected the notion of a tranquil rural existence, asserting that she was destined for greater things. He depicted the nuanced tactics she used, swaying not just Charles but also whole spheres of influence with her obvious allure. His statements were not reckless allegations, but calculated remembrances articulated with a precision that penetrated more profoundly than any tabloid speculation. The attendees saw instantly that these disclosures transcended mere gossip. These were facts capable of dismantling reputations, disintegrating marriages, and permanently tarnishing the crown. The burden of these admissions soon became apparent. They arrived at Prince William as if intentionally planned. The future king listened intently as Andrew's evidence was conveyed, each detail corroborating the suspicions he had harbored in secret for years. For William, this transcended Camilla's history. The discussion centered on the current scandals and internal strife that relentlessly plagued his family. Andrew's remarks interwove the elements, linking Camilla's alleged manipulation to the current instability undermining the monarchy. In such times, William comprehended why he could no longer be passive. The confession served not just as a reminiscence of the past, but as a grave admonition for the future. Andrew articulated his warning in vivid, indelible language. He informed those willing to heed his warning that the monarchy faced the risk of being poisoned from within. Although he did not explicitly identify Camilla in this serious evaluation, the message was unmistakable. His voice, laden with decades of wisdom, has a weight that even doubters could not disregard. A man who had lived beside her, seeing her ascent from the obscurity of society to the throne, now raised the warning that the crown's existence was jeopardized. William, already conflicted between his obligation to his father and his strong protective instincts for his family, now had the excuse he needed. Andrew Parker Bowles's admission was the pivotal moment, the catalyst that transformed William's latent anger into definitive, irrevocable action. A network of treachery, the venom, seeping into the present. Andrew Parker Bowles's revelation not only exposed Camilla's aspirations, but also revealed the more sinister reality of how those aspirations were cultivated, safeguarded, and eventually gratified. He spoke with the frankness of one devoid of stakes, conceding that during their union, Camilla's focus was directed not towards affection, but towards influence. She navigated society not as a complacent wife, but as a strategist, meticulously orchestrating each interaction and relationship to further her proximity to the throne. In his unsettling account, Andrew disclosed that he had just served as a conduit. He acknowledged that Camilla used his position as a prominent army commander and his intimate associations with royal family members to infiltrate the circles that would ultimately determine her destiny. What he had saw as charm or friendliness, he now recognized as cold calculation. She understood where to position herself, whom to appease, and which barriers to breach. Andrew, perhaps blinded by loyalty or pride, permitted it. He has now admitted to being involved in her ascent, remaining quiet while she navigated farther into the monarchy's inner circle. However, Andrew's disclosures extended beyond Camilla's individual aspirations. He proposed that her whole family benefited from her unwavering ascent. Camilla's children and relatives profited from contacts established in royal hallways, ranging from discreet favors to lucrative commercial possibilities. Andrew delineated a pattern in which personal ambition intertwined with familial development, each achievement consolidating their influence inside the royal framework. It was not only Camilla's rise that troubled him, but the legacy she was establishing for her lineage, a legacy that, in his view, undermined the fragile equilibrium of power inside the monarchy. Andrew's voice was mostly burdened by his sorrow for having kept quiet for an extended period. He acknowledged instances when he might have voiced his concerns and alerted people around about the developing situation. However, fear, pride, and the deep-seated want to avoid public disgrace kept him silent. He saw his quiet as a breach of his conscience, which had let Camilla's influence to expand unrestrained. William saw not only history, but the imminent threat before him. For the Prince of Wales, the confession was not only a narrative of history, but an unveiling of the persistent dangers that remained. He increasingly saw that Camilla's family's presence in the palace was not benign, but detrimental, perpetuating the same insidious impact Andrew had articulated decades before. The notion that Catherine, Princess of Wales, and her children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, might eventually be eclipsed, exploited, or subverted by this persistent network of affiliations, was unacceptable. The seeds of rage started to germinate inside him, not just as a son safeguarding his father's reign, but as a husband and father defending his family's future. The treachery Andrew recounted did not remain confined to forgotten memories. It became entrenched in the present, its toxicity gradually eroding William's determination. Each word Andrew spoke seemed to solidify his resolve, transforming murmurs of uncertainty into commitments of action. The past had become a persistent affliction that jeopardized the monarchy's existence. The purge and the Queen's fury. What begun as whispers of dissatisfaction inside the palace evolved into a violent public proclamation. Camilla's offspring and their progeny would cease to derive advantages from the monarchy's authority, affluence, or prominence. Royal patronages once conferred as symbols of legitimacy were rescinded abruptly. Financial advantages that had discreetly traversed invisible pathways were abruptly terminated. What had seemed as a solid heritage of access and power disintegrated with a single royal decree. The impact was most profound inside Camilla's family. The shielding they had depended on for decades disappeared, subjecting them to a surge of public disgrace and loss. It constituted a generational rupture, a resolution that guaranteed Camilla's lineage would no longer have influence inside the monarchy's essence. Camilla's rage was explosive. In private, she attacked William with a malice he had long expected but never before seen. Her voice, once the refined timbre of a queen consort, fractured with fury as she charged him with cruelty, treachery, and vindictiveness. She insisted on Answer's devotion and acknowledgement of her family as integral to the royal entity. However, William remained resolute. His voice, calm but resolute, conveyed the rationale she dreaded most, Andrew Parker Bowles's admission. He referenced the incriminating statements of her ex-husband as evidence that her family's influence posed a threat to the existence of the crown. What she saw as historical complaints, William characterized as ongoing dangers. Then came the words that chilled the atmosphere. "This concludes now." With that ominous admonition, William delineated a boundary not just against Camilla's lineage, but also against every manifestation of ambition they embodied. It was not only a conclusion, it was a termination of their destiny under the monarchy executed by the person destined to govern. A desperate counteroffensive. Humiliated and besieged, Camilla launched a desperate counteroffensive. Deprived of the authority she had meticulously amassed over decades, she resolutely refused to acquiesce to defeat. The queen consort, familiar with wielding power behind the throne, was unprepared to see the erasure of her children and grandchildren from royal existence. In a tumult of passion, she assembled her friends both inside the palace and across the wider aristocracy. Long-standing confidants, sympathetic courtiers, and political individuals she had meticulously nurtured over the years were abruptly drawn back into her sphere. She aimed to establish a coalition, a group capable of opposing William's harsh edict. However, her most formidable asset was the king himself. Emotional, exposed, but fervently pleading, Camilla implored Charles directly. She saw William's actions as a betrayal not only of herself, but also of him, contending that for her family to be ostracized was an affront to his power as ruler. In private, she implored his help using every emotional tactic available to her. Charles, fatigued and frail from his own health struggles, found himself ensnared in an untenable predicament. The lady he had endeavored to legalize, to crown, and to safeguard was imploring him to defend her from his own successor. William, his son, articulated with chilling certainty that the monarchy's preservation necessitated this sacrifice. Charles's silence exacerbated the divide, transforming the palace from a residence into a battleground. Beyond those barriers, the tempest intensified. Deliberate disclosures to preferred media channels started to depict William as callous. Headlines depicted him as a ruthless son betraying his stepfamily. Narratives of Camilla's grandchildren being cast out into exile elicited popular empathy. Commentators conjectured if William's stringent position jeopardized his support among the populace. The assault was deliberate, intended to undermine his image of benevolence and diminish his backing before to ascending the throne. However, although she exerted pressure, Camilla alluded to an even more sinister weapon in her repertoire. In private, she cautioned William that, should he persist with his cleansing, she would be compelled to disclose her own secrets, truths, concealed inside the House of Windsor that may jeopardize not just reputations, but the monarchy itself. The warning, whether a bluff or a real danger, permeated the atmosphere, unsettling the courtiers and inciting William's fury. The matter had ceased to be a private quarrel. It constituted a formal declaration of war. The second confession. A more sinister reality unfolds. Just when the palace believed Andrew Parker Bowles had disclosed all, a further, more catastrophic revelation surfaced. While his first disclosures unsettled the monarchy, his subsequent revelations obliterated it like an earthquake, demolishing any last weak illusions. Andrew, formerly a man willing to conceal the past, now acknowledged the unimaginable. He had deliberately protected Camilla, obscuring transactions that might have thwarted her rise before it started. With the serene composure of one unencumbered by remorse, he admitted to suppressing facts, organizing diversions, and guaranteeing that potential scandals never reached the attention of those capable of halting her ascent. In doing so, he transformed from being her spouse into her enabler, a tacit architect of the turmoil now engulfing the monarchy. One of the most startling revelations was the implication of clandestine financial arrangements, advantages directed to her family at the monarchy's detriment. Andrew elucidated the discreet exchange of favors behind closed doors, guaranteeing that Camilla's offspring and family obtained benefits unattainable via conventional means. These agreements, whether financial or social, enhanced their power, further entrenching them inside the framework of privilege. What seemed to be chance or coincidence was, he said, a deliberate approach that he now confessed to concealing from scrutiny. However, the most catastrophic disclosure was his recognition of how Camilla had used Charles's weaknesses. Andrew described her awareness of the fissures in Charles's psyche, his want for intimacy, and his uncertainties around responsibility. Each whisper, every carefully selected remark, and every demonstration of empathy was, he now saw, not just compassion, but a strategic maneuver to ensnare him more in her grip. His regret was evident. He characterized himself as a man who refrained from intervention, opting for quiet rather than truth, so allowing Camilla's ascension to the throne to go unopposed. He recounted restless evenings plagued by the vision of Diana, reflecting on her suffering and acknowledging that the same schemes he had aided in obscuring exacerbated her anguish. Hearing him articulate it publicly dismantled years of denial, revealing just the unvarnished reality of his culpability. For William, these disclosures intensified the terror. It was no longer only about Camilla's aspirations. It pertained to the suffering endured by his mother. Andrew's revelation intertwined the elements, revealing that Diana's distress was not a product of coincidence, but of intentional orchestration. Every syllable etched into William's determination, converting sorrow into just indignation. As his belief intensified, the world's affection thus increased. The historically divided public started to unite in support of William and Catherine. His mother's anguish had been justified, and his opposition to Camilla's relatives increasingly resembled justice rather than cruelty. A conflict over Diana's heritage. This beyond mere concern for Camilla, it pertained to his mother, Diana. In a singular resolute action, William pledged to safeguard her legacy at whatever cost. The recollection of her anguish had always remained with him. As Camilla's family resisted, William drew fortitude from the concept of Diana not as a remote figure, but as a guiding presence advocating for justice. Catherine's support remained unwavering at his side. The palace had ceased to be a residence and had transformed into a battleground. Still, Catherine remained steadfast beside her husband, exuding a serene fortitude. She saw the gravity of the situation, not just William's legacy, but also the safeguarding of their children from the recurrent cycles of anguish that had traumatized their grandmother. In this intense environment of strife, William issued his most formidable proclamation. With the same resolve that had characterized Diana's resistance, he asserted his need to shield his children from Camilla's influence. He would not let her family to influence the fate of his progeny. For him, this was a struggle for the preservation of Diana's legacy and the crown itself. To many, William's stance represented poetic justice. the son of Diana resolutely opposing the dynasty that had flourished in her shadow, was a moment the world could not overlook. Subtle changes started among the royal family. Princess Anne, always pragmatic and staunchly devoted to the monarchy's stability, subtly aligned herself with William, indicating that the dynamics had irrevocably changed. A monarchy in peril. The palace has seen controversies before, but never a conflict of this magnitude. William and Camilla were engaged in overt conflict with Charles caught in the middle as the monarchy teetered on the edge. Their fights were explosive in private. Charles, burdened by conflicting allegiances, saw a decline in both his health and morale. His failure to intervene exacerbated the division, indicating that compromise was unattainable. The king's quiet was seen not as neutrality, but as a manifestation of weakness. The disorder proliferated. Royal personnel, long familiar with enduring adversity, begun resigning en masse, alleging an intolerable and toxic atmosphere. Their exits became a further emblem of disintegration, fueling the media frenzy. The public grew polarized with each camp, certain that their position embodied justice. Globally, the narrative escalated into an obsession characterized in sharp terms as the monarchy's civil war. Amidst this turmoil, William spoke words that reverberated around the palace. This is only the beginning. This declaration signified a point of no return, the ultimate bet and a broken tomorrow. In a last desperate endeavor, Camilla executed her last stand. Overwhelmed by shame, she fell before Charles in an emotional collapse, imploring him to intercede. With quivering hands, she revealed a clandestine letter, which she said contained revelations capable of altering the equilibrium in her favor, a last weapon extracted from obscurity. Nonetheless, this desperate attempt proved unsuccessful. Charles, fatigued and conflicted, declined to oppose his son, seeing that the kingdom could not endure another schism. With the king's tacit approval, her family was formally and irrevocably divested of all responsibilities, entitlements, and financial connections to the crown. William stood victorious, not exultant, but detached. His triumph epitomized a new epoch characterized by his steadfast determination. The atmosphere in the palace is laden with ominous anticipation. Even in victory, the remnants of this conflict will endure. The monarchy seems to be irreparably shattered, with increasing speculation on its potential for complete recovery. William's merciless choice reverberates beyond the palace confines, a monumental occurrence that has irrevocably altered the fate of the House of Windsor. The son has avenged his mother. The future. King has solidified his rule. However, the price of this triumph is a crown more fragmented and susceptible than ever. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know your thoughts, and goodbye for now.